All right, last lecture we finished up with exclusions and limits. Want to talk here about, whoops, no, I'm on the wrong page. Give me 1 second. Let me fix this. There we go. Now I'm on the right slide. We were talking about exclusions and limits, but here's the slide that we were on. Now we got to talk about section 3, physical damage. Okay, so two types of physical damage. We've got collision and comprehensive. In the personal auto policy, we called it collision and other than collision. So collision is defined as impact with another vehicle or an object. It's actually not defined, but that's how it's generally understood to be meant. You run into something. Or there's the overturn of a covered vehicle. So it doesn't have to completely overturn if it just fell on its side. It's generally understood that upsetting the equilibrium of the vehicle is a collision. So that's kind of tricky because you say, well, it sounds like collision isn't overturning the vehicle. You didn't run into anything necessarily. No, we just have to know that overturn of a covered auto is considered a collision. The other things that can happen that can cause loss to your vehicle are going to be handled under comprehensive. So those are going to be things like theft or hail damage, or a tree falls on your car, those kinds of things. Anything that's not a collision that can cause physical damage to your vehicle, that's going to be comprehensive. Most of the time you're either buying both or neither. It's really, you could buy collision and not comprehensive, but that's weird. Normally you're doing this because you can't afford to replace the cost of the vehicle out of pocket. So I mentioned before, our business, we specifically decided to retain the physical damage losses of our vehicles because we had a lot of trucks, but none of them were really particularly valuable. And as long as we didn't have one big simultaneous loss, it wasn't catastrophic. And they were spread out over enough locations and stored in covered locations that we didn't think that would happen. So yeah, if we had a single loss to one of them, rather than paying a premium every 6 months to cover that possibility, we decided it was going to be less expensive for us to just retain that loss exposure. If the vehicles were more valuable, it'd be a totally different calculation. There you'd probably buy collision and comprehensive. And again, you're usually buying both or neither. It'd be really unusual to buy one but not the other. Then we have a third one that kind of dials back the comprehensive a little bit. You can save some money if you choose a specified causes of loss form. And now we're going to named perils, right? So fire, wind, lightning, explosion, theft, flood, hail, earthquake, mischief, and vandalism. Those are the covered causes of loss if you go with this third type of restricted comprehensive coverage. You can do that if you want. And again, usually you're either buying both or you're buying neither. So 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or none of them at all. You can also get towing coverage and transportation expense. So transportation expense covers the loss of use, right? So you have a vehicle that's destroyed or damaged and you can't drive it the way it is. You have to rent a substitute. That's where your $600 limit is going to come in. Usually $20 per day is your limit there. And then towing coverage is a separate coverage you can buy where they'll pay for labor on site to get your car up on the tow truck and then brought in. So you can get towing coverage if you want to. And that's part of the physical damage coverage as well. Some exclusions here. Hey, we got war and nuclear hazards. You're going to see that in every contract always. Now, interestingly, flood and earthquake are covered here. And again, remember, that's because your autos are mobile. So presumably if a flood's coming, you're going to get your vehicles out of the way. You can't do that with a building, right? So that's why we can offer flood coverage on a vehicle. So normally flood and earthquake, you hear that, you think it's excluded. Not here, it's actually covered. Wear and tear on the vehicle, that's a standard exclusion. Look, tires eventually need to be replaced. That's not something we handle with insurance coverage. Whatever music media you have, that's an exclusion. Diminution in value, that's the idea that once it's repaired, it's not worth as much as it was before it was repaired. That loss is kind of an opportunity loss. It's something that you can't really specifically define. Insurance says, hey, we're not covering that. So a vehicle that's had an accident, yep, it's worth less than the same vehicle with the same miles, the same wear and tear that has not had an accident. We don't cover that value difference there. And then like always, the most we're going to pay is actual cash value or the cost to, if it happens that the cost to repair or replace is less, then we'll pay that. So repair cost or actual cash value, we're not paying the full replacement cost of the vehicle, and you can see why, right? If we settle this loss on a replacement cost basis, well, everybody's got an incentive then to destroy their vehicles so they can get brand new ones. We can't have that, right? Huge moral hazard problem. So actual cash value is what you get, or cost to repair if that's less. So that's the limit there. So that's the physical damage coverage. That's section 3. Section 4 talks about conditions. So there's an appraisal condition, and we ran into this in the business personal property form. If there's a disagreement on what it costs to fix the vehicle, and if it not whether or not there's coverage, that's a different disagreement. We have to handle that in court. If an insurance company says we're not paying, then you're going to have to sue them to get them to cover it if you think they ought to be paying it. That's how we handle that disagreement. Here, we don't disagree that it's covered. Everybody knows it's covered. What we're disagreeing about is the value of the loss, and we handle it the same way. Each side has an appraiser. The appraisers together choose an umpire, and then if the two appraisers can't agree, then the umpire weighs in, and whichever side gets the 2/3 vote, that's what we do. Other conditions are the same as in other contracts. You have a duty to notify, a duty to cooperate, right? You get sued, you might have to testify, you might have to give a deposition, you got to forward all your legal papers. Any property that can be temporarily fixed to prevent further damage, you've got to agree to do that. So you have to protect. And usually that's where the conditions come in. We usually have 3, and it's notify, cooperate, protect. We've seen that before. You can't sue the insurance company unless you've complied with all the underlying conditions. So you have to do everything in the coverage form before legal action gets before any legal action gets involved. And then the insurance company doesn't pay any money until a legal entity, a judge or a jury, has decided that you're liable, or if the insurance company decides on their own, yep, our insured is going to be liable, so we agreed to pay. It is interesting when you have a physical damage, especially on a valuable vehicle, there's a difference between what the insurance company in a total loss situation, what happens to the damaged vehicle. If you want to keep the damaged vehicle and sell it for parts, that's great. But then it'll reduce the payment that you get from the insurance company. If you just abandon the property to them, then they will give you a greater payment, because if there's any residual value from parting out what's left over, they'll take care of that. And ultimately, you should be compensated for that. If you're going to keep that yourself, that's fine, but then you're going to have a reduced payment. So that's something that sometimes happens with physical damage losses. There's a few other additional provisions that we should talk about. If the insured goes bankrupt, again, just like in the CGL, that doesn't influence the insurance company's duties. They still have to defend. They still have to pay if there's any claim. Material misrepresentation, same thing. If we find something that you said that is not true on an application or on a statement of loss form, that immediately voids coverage at the insurance company's option. So harsh remedy, but that's how they handle that. Liberalization, that says if we change the standard form in the middle of your contract and make it better, you automatically get the benefit of the better coverage without having to do anything. It doesn't work the other way. If we make it more restrictive, that doesn't apply to you until policy renewal. But if we make it better, the liberalization clause says you immediately get the benefit of that. The no benefit to bailee is trying to prevent a double payment. So if you had property that you were shipping for somebody else, and they have it insured somewhere, and now you also have insurance here, if they get reimbursed by insurance, then your insurance isn't going to make a double payment. That's what they're trying to say. We have an other insurance provision here, and the rule in auto is simple. It's always this. You may have coverage, and then somebody else may also have coverage on the same vehicle. You borrow somebody's vehicle. Okay, well, you have coverage if you got symbol 1, right? And presumably the owner of the vehicle has coverage too. So what happens? Well, insurance on the vehicle is always primary. That's the rule. So whoever's a vehicle it is whoever owns the vehicle, and their insurance is going to be primary. Even if it's covered in two places, it's going to be primary excess. So any insurance that we have in addition, we borrow somebody else's car. We've got symbol one, we're covered everywhere. But if they have insurance, we're using theirs first because insurance on the vehicle is primary. Insurance from another source is always excess. And that's the rule with vehicles. That's how it always is. Personal, commercial, doesn't matter. Insurance on the vehicle is primary. That's what you want to remember. And then we have a clause in here that talks about a premium audit. And that's so the premium that's listed on the declarations, that's an estimate. It could be that we acquire more autos, and that's going to change the premium. If we got symbol one, no problem, everything's covered. But there will be a day of reckoning where we say, look, you bought an extra 5 autos. Maybe I'm a huge company. Maybe I bought 20 new autos. Well, yeah, we have to adjust the premium. It was always covered. But at renewal time, somebody's going to come through and look, and that's where they're going to pick up if you have newly acquired autos that are different from the ones that you had. So we have our audit provision in here as well. There are some coverages you can get by endorsement. Medical payments, that's a no-fault coverage, and that will pay people on a first-party basis. So my people who are in the car, when they get hurt, we might be able to handle that. Similarly, we've got personal injury protection. That's going to be a state-mandated coverage, and it is a medical payments coverage. That's usually what it is. Some states require that. So if you need that, we can endorse that coverage in. And then same thing with state-required uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist. That one you have to be careful on. Again, it makes sense if you're going to do this, either buy it or don't, and buy them both or don't buy them at all if you have a choice. Some states don't give you a choice. You must buy it. Okay, fine. If you have a choice, you're either buying insurance against the possibility of your drivers being hurt by an uninsured motorist. If you just buy uninsured and they cause more damage than the limit that they have, like in Indiana, hey, 25, 50, 10 is all you need to have to be legal. 25,000 max per person, 50,000 max per accident, bodily injury, and 10,000 max for property damage. If you've only bought uninsured motorist and that person smacks into you and causes $200,000 worth of damage, if all you have is uninsured, it won't pay because the person was insured. The problem is they were underinsured, and that's a separate line of coverage. So in my mind, you either got to buy both or neither, and you want to keep those limits about the same. There's really no reason to have lower limits for underinsured motorists, although some people will do that. I want to talk about the garage coverage form. So we're shifting gears here. Here's the idea. We're combining, this is a specific policy for specific businesses that are in the business of selling autos or servicing autos or storing them or parking them. And what it's doing is it's combining the CGL with auto coverage. So we're doing that in one form. So most other businesses have a CGL and then they have a commercial auto form if they have vehicles. But in the garage coverage form, you can get both the CGL coverages and the auto coverages all in one form. And so that'll give you liability coverage for a garage and then garage keepers coverage. And that's generally going to be handling your customers' vehicles there, the liability that can come from that. And then we can also build in auto physical damage coverage if we want. So those are the coverages we're looking at in the garage coverage form. Let's go ahead and advance here. So the sections here, we have an extra section because we have to talk about what most other companies would have covered in their CGL. That's liability coverage. And then the auto part of it actually is going to come in section 3 here with garage keepers coverage with the customers part of it. The liability coverage is going to combine the auto liability and then all other types of liability, CGL, premises operations, completed operations, and product liability. So for the autos that are covered, we have symbols just like we did before. And 21 and all through 29, and it's going to parallel the 1 through 9 symbols that we already talked about. So 21 is all autos. 22 is owned autos. 27 is specific autos, right? And again, 27, the risk that you take is if you have a newly acquired auto that you fail to list. If it's not a replacement for one that was covered, then you're not covered for the damage, that liability that comes about from that auto, and that's a problem. Symbol 30 is for garage keepers coverage on the customer's autos that they leave with us for safekeeping or for service or repair. And then symbol 31 is for dealers' autos that we're holding for sale. So yeah, those are the different coverages that come about when you start to talk about these very specific auto-related businesses. So liability coverage pays for the damages here. You don't automatically get coverage for your new businesses like you would under the CGL, unless it's a new garage business. If it's a similar business, then your newly acquired business is covered. But if, all right, I'm a garage business, I do auto work, auto repair work, and I go out and I buy a laundromat, yep, I don't automatically get liability, general liability extended like I would if I had a CGL. So that's something to know. Your customers are actually insureds, but only up to the state limits unless you specifically endorse for higher limits. So that's kind of interesting. Garage keepers coverage. This is where customers have brought us their vehicles. So we'll have a collision, comprehensive, and specified cause of loss, just like we did before. And the neat idea about here is we want direct coverage, right? It's only liability if the loss is caused from my negligence. There would be all kinds of things that could happen that would damage a customer's car while it's in my care, custody, and control. The problem is my customer is going to expect me to make good on those losses. So it's probably not wise for me to take the stance that, well, hey, I wasn't negligent, not my problem. It's better to try to maintain goodwill, to say, look, yeah, it was in our possession. We're going to make good on it. And we're going to get direct coverage to make sure that insurance will pay, regardless of whether the loss was caused by our negligence or not. The physical damage coverage, this is for the dealer's autos that they own. So here we've got physical damage coverage. Maybe I sell automobiles. Yeah, this is a big deal. Actually, we had Auto Owners Insurance Company come a few years ago and make a great presentation about autos dealers and the exposures that they faced. And one of the big problems that they had was, if you're an auto dealer, most of the time this isn't covered. It's usually open space, which is fine until you have a hailstorm. You have a hailstorm come through, and guess what? Yeah, every single one of the cars that you have is damaged, and that's a massive, massive loss. So they were trying to figure out, well, what can we do? And they solved the problem by raising deductibles big time. So a dealer would have to be prepared to handle major losses, a big chunk of that themselves, through a higher deductible, like $100,000 or $500,000 first, before insurance would even kick in. And that was just because they'd had too many of those types of losses. We're going to rate them in aggregate. So we're not going to specifically rate by identifying each vehicle you have and how much it's worth. We're going to do this on a blanket basis. What's your total vehicle inventory? What's the value of that? That's going to be our limit. You've got some exclusions that you do have to deal with. I'll let you look those up in the textbook if you're interested. There's good information there. But now we're really getting down into specifics. There is no business income coverage here. So loss of use, the idea if all my vehicles are destroyed and I got nothing to sell, this isn't where you would find coverage for that. You'd have to get coverage for that through a business income policy. When we rate overall commercial auto, so not the garage keeper, now we're talking about all commercial auto. What we have here is you've got one rate for private passenger vehicles. You've got another rate for trucks, tractors, and trailers, and it gets more specific here. Now we want to know how big they are, how often are you driving them, and then how far. The radius class is, well, how much driving are you doing? That's obviously a big factor. The more driving you do, the more accidents you would expect. So part of that is a use. How frequently are you doing this? But the other part is how far you're going, and that's the radius class. So we're going to rate for those three factors. And then when we actually get down to the premiums, it depends a big deal on whether or not it's what we call zone rated. So something within 200 miles is not zone rated. Anything that's more than 200 miles, now we're going to zone rate that, and it's going to depend, well, where are you traveling? What's the weather like in that area? Obviously in the South, we don't have snow to deal with. Road conditions are easier, fewer accidents. You start to get up north and you start to travel more than 200 miles, and you're probably going to run into that kind of stuff. And that's why we have zone rating. For light trucks that are also within 200 miles, it's not zone rated. And there we're looking at the nature of operations. What are you doing? You're a dump truck and you're hauling rocks from a construction site. Okay, fine. You're dealing with delivering new vehicles to your Tesla, and you're delivering new vehicles to your customers. Well, okay, fine. That's a different type of exposure. The nature of those operations is going to matter there if it's not going to be zone rated. Okay, that's a pretty good overview of commercial auto. I tried to keep it to just the 3 lectures. The book has a lot more. You can always have your book and your notes with you when you're taking an exam. I hope you've been taking notes as we've been talking, because I think you'll find that that stuff is valuable. But we'll go from there. That's the conclusion of commercial auto. So thanks a lot, guys. You got questions, let me know, and I'll do the best I can to answer.